Hello everyone, welcome to our first round of the October workshops for October 2021. In this series, we're going to be covering books that have inspired us to write. And so we're going to be looking at the books and we're going to be looking at the writing that has inspired ourselves. To start us off, I think we're going to go ahead and throw out a check-in question, which is, what is the farthest from home you've ever been? So joining us today at the Mount Carmel building here in Colorado Springs is Stephen, an awesome guest who's just stepped in. So here to put you on the spot, what's the farthest you've ever been from what you consider home?
Oh, this is terrible. Auckland, New Zealand, maybe Perth, Australia, or Auckland, New Zealand.
Okay. Wow, cool place. Yeah. I'd say the farthest I've ever been from home, I don't really know, because I have a weird definition of home. Home is not where I was born for me. Home is where I feel like I belong. And so I think the farthest I've ever been from home is actually when I go back to Ohio to visit my friends and family, because this is home for me now.
I'd say the farthest I've been would be Switzerland and France, like just going away from the United States. That's probably the farthest I would have to consider.
Well, now that we've all stated how far the farthest we've been from home, it's time to actually introduce ourselves, because that would be, makes sense. So I am Angela Bassi. I am a 6-year veteran of the United States Army Infantry and a recent graduate of the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. And I am the co-founder of the Veterans Writing Community. Joining us today is...
I'm Natalie. I am a Air Force veteran, served 4 years, and I'm currently serving in the reserves. I'm a student at UCCS, majoring in biology with an internship in genetics, and I'm the social media and graphic arts manager for the VWC.
And then you can't see her, but you can see her name at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen sometimes. Running tech today is Delin Martinez. She's an instructor, a senior instructor at UCCS in the Rhetoric and Writing Department program, and she is also the other co-founder of the VWC. She's a very good friend of mine. So now that we have introduced ourselves, we have posted the check-in question. Natalie, go ahead and give us our housekeeping and expectations of what we'll be doing today.
All right, today, make sure you have a notebook and pen ready for some short writing exercises that will happen periodically today through our workshop. And I got mine here because I want to be a legend. And make sure you have your notebook. This is a 90-minute session, and you'll have at least 20 minutes of ideas on paper when you're done. Disclaimer, we will talk about writing as being therapeutic, but we are not therapists. And tonight's writing is not meant to be taken as therapy or as its substitute. So don't be afraid to post questions in the comments or raise your hand during a reading or discussion. We'd like to involve everyone in the conversation. We want you to share your own writing if you want to. And please like and share our videos if you're joining us online, so your friends can enjoy them too. And if you're watching this after our live presentation, please don't forget to comment #replay. And let's get this started.
All righty. So to start us off, we are going to have a writing sprint. And would you explain to us what a writing sprint is?
So our first writing sprint is going to be about 5 minutes. And pretty much when you do a writing sprint, once the timer starts, don't stop writing. So just get your ideas down, everything, and keep it going based off of our 2 prompts that we're going to have posted in the chat. Or for Stephen, we'll let you know what our prompts are today. And pretty much you can change topics if you feel like it, but don't put your pen down until the timer is done.
So today we have 2 prompts, and our prompts are, our first prompt is, what story do you want to tell, but you haven't told yet? What's holding you back? And the second prompt is a little bit lighter. Write about the best or the worst party you've ever been to. So, you're going to have to share screen that, Delin. Screen share that. So Delin is working on getting up a timer for us, and once that timer is up on the screen, it is going to go for 5 minutes. Let us know how long we have to write, and we are going to get going. So now that I see that timer up there, go ahead and kick us off. About 1 minute remaining. About 10 seconds left. Go ahead and wrap things up. Dot your I's, cross your T's, put in any punctuation you think might be necessary or you just want to have in there anyway. Let's go ahead and wrap things up. So to start things off, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion after some reading. And today's reading is going to be two pieces. The first piece will be ambush, and the second piece will be good form. And both of these stories are coming from the book, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which you're not really able to see from here. Sorry about that. So, ambush. When she was 9, my daughter Kathleen asked if I had ever killed anyone. She knew about the war. She knew I'd been a soldier. You keep writing these war stories, she said, so I guess you must have killed somebody. It was a difficult moment, but I did what seemed right, which was to say, of course not. And then to take her onto my lap and hold her for a while. Someday I hope she'll ask again. But here, I want to pretend she's a grown-up. I want to tell her exactly what happened, or what I remember her happening. And then I want to say to her that as a little girl, she was absolutely right. This is why I keep writing war stories. He was a short, slender young man of about 20. I was afraid of him, afraid of something. And as he passed me on the trail, I threw a grenade that exploded at his feet and killed him. Or to go back. Shortly after midnight, we moved into the ambush site outside my key. The whole platoon was there, spread out in the dense brush along the trail. And for 5 hours, nothing at all happened. We were working in 2-man teams, one man on guard while the other slept, switching off every 2 hours. And I remember it was still dark when Kiowa shook me awake for the final watch. The night was foggy and hot. For the first few moments, I felt lost, not sure about directions, groping for my helmet and weapon. I reached out and found 3 grenades and lined them up in front of me. The pins had already been straightened for quick throwing. And then, for maybe a half hour, I kneeled and waited. Very gradually, in tiny slivers, dawn began to break through the fog. And from my position in the brush, I could see 10 or 15 meters up the trail. The mosquitoes were fierce. I remember slapping at them, wondering if I should wake up Kiowa and ask for some repellent, then thinking it was a bad idea. Then looking up and seeing the young man come out of the fog. He wore black clothing and rubber sandals and a gray ammunition belt. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side as if listening for something. He seemed at ease. He carried his weapon in one hand, muzzle down, moving without any hurry, up the center of the trail. There was no sound at all, none that I can remember. In a way, it seemed he was part of the morning fog, or my own imagination, but there was also the reality of what was happening in my stomach. I had already pulled the pin on the grenade. I'd come up into a crouch. It was entirely automatic. I did not hate the young man. I did not see him as the enemy. I did not ponder issues of morality or politics or military duty. I crouched and kept my head low. I tried to swallow whatever was rising from my stomach, which tasted like lemonade, something fruity and sour. I was terrified. There were no thoughts about killing. The grenade was to make him go away, just evaporate. And as I leaned back and felt my head go empty and then felt it fill up again, I had already thrown the grenade before telling myself to throw it. The brush was thick and I had to lob it high, not aiming. And I remember the grenade seeming to freeze above me for an instant, as if a camera had clicked. And I remember ducking down and holding my breath and seeing little wisps of fog rise from the earth. The grenade bounced once and must have rolled across the trail. I did not hear it, but there must have been a sound because the young man dropped his weapon and began to run. It was 2 or 3 quick steps, and then he hesitated, swiveled to his right, and he glanced down at the grenade and tried to cover his head, but never did. It occurred to me then that he was about to die. I wanted to warn him. The grenade made a popping noise, not soft, not loud either, not what I expected. And there was a puff of dust and smoke, a small white puff, and the young man seemed to jerk upward as if pulled by invisible wires. He fell on his back. His rubber sandals had been blown off. He lay at the center of the trail, his right leg beneath him, his one eye shut, the other a huge star-shaped hole. For me, it was not a matter of live or die. I was in no real peril. Almost certainly, the young man would have passed me by, and it will always be that way. Later, I remember Kiowa tried to tell me that the man would have died anyway. He told me that it was a good kill, that I was a soldier and this was a war, that I should shape up and stop staring and ask myself what the dead man would have done if things were reversed. None of it mattered. The words seemed far too complicated. All I could do is gape at the fact of the young man's body. Even now, I haven't finished sorting it out. Sometimes I forgive myself. Other times I don't. In the ordinary hours of life, I try not to dwell on it. But now and then, when I'm reading a newspaper or just sitting alone in a room, I'll look up and see the young man step out of the morning fog. I'll watch him walk toward me, his shoulders slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side, and he'll pass within a few yards of me and suddenly smile at some secret thought and then continue up the trail to where it bends back into the fog. So we're going to do one more reading, but I want to talk about this reading real quick. When I first read The Things They Carried, this is one of the stories that really stuck with me, in part because I was combat infantry. Like, I actually did the job that O'Brien is doing in this book. And so I have a connection to the job that he's doing and the experiences, some of the things that he's scared of. I've had some similar experiences and I've been scared in the same way. I have some of the same guilt. And so reading O'Brien and reading about the guilt he feels for this death that he caused, it resonates personally with me. But if you've read The Things They Carried, you know that this book is so much more than the individual stories in here. And you're going to see how O'Brien takes ownership of his actions, but he also shows that his actions aren't necessarily the actions we think they are. And that is something that resonated with me as well. So the next story we're going to read is Good Form. And it's going to talk about some of the same things that he was just talking about in Ambush. Good Form. It's time to be blunt. I'm 43 years old. True. And I'm a writer now. And a long time ago, I walked through Quang Ngai province as a foot soldier. Almost everything else is invented. But it's not a game, it's a form. Right here, now, as I invent myself, I'm thinking of all I want to tell you about why this book is written the way it is. For instance, I want to tell you this. 20 years ago, I watched a man die on a trail near the village of Mikey. I did not kill him. But I was present, you see, and my presence was guilt enough. I remember his face, which was not a pretty face, because his jaw was in his throat. And I remember feeling the burden of responsibility and grief. I blamed myself. And rightly so, because I was present. But listen, even that story is made up. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to know why story truth is sometimes truer than happening truth. Here's the happening truth. I was once a soldier. There were many bodies, with real faces. But I was young then, and I was afraid to look. And now, 20 years later, I'm left with faceless responsibility, faceless grief. Here's the story truth. He was a slim, dead, almost dainty young man of about 20. He lay in the center of a red clay trail near the village of Mikey. His jaw was in his throat, his one eye shut, the other a star-shaped hole. I killed him. What stories can do, I guess, is make things present. I can look at things I never looked at. I can attach faces to grief and pity and love and God. I can be brave. I can make myself feel again. Daddy, tell the truth, Kathleen can say. Did you ever kill anybody? And I can honestly say, of course not. Or I can honestly say, yes. So I really like reading these two stories together. And in the book, they're maybe a good 30 pages away, maybe 40 pages away. So they're not meant to go side by side. In a lot of ways, that makes sense. O'Brien's talking about the same event, but he's talking about it in different ways. In one, he's taking total ownership of what he did. And in the other, he's having an explicit denial while maintaining ownership. This is something that I felt personally because I've been through certain experiences, and I'll be reading a story in a little bit about one of those experiences. I've been through stuff, and one thing has happened, but the way that I live with that experience for the rest of my life is entirely different than the way it happened. So these two stories for me, in a way, gave me permission in my own mind to understand that, well, there's one historical truth, there's one happening truth. There can be multiple story truths. And sometimes you have to forget what the happening truth is in order to be able to express what that story truth is. Sometimes in order to tell how you feel, you have to be able to forget what actually happened and just say how you feel. Stephen, do you have any thoughts on those two readings? If you don't, you want to pass, feel free.
Just the heaviness of them, just reflecting on his time of, well, the last one you read, Good Form, of the grenades, and knowing this man did nothing to him, but knowing his life's about to end and how he's able to process that at the time and really look back upon it. I know nothing about the Vietnam War except for history. I met a lot of the soldiers, and I'm very grateful for them. Because of the Vietnam veterans, in 1979, there was an act where the Vet Center was opened up in their honor, and I was afforded through my service to take advantage because of my combat to utilize the vet center and their services and to get a better handle on my life at the time. And I'm grateful for that. I wouldn't be here. But as far as the reading, this is really heavy. I really don't have much to process. But
So let me ask you this question. In Ambush, like I mentioned before, O'Brien kind of takes that complete ownership. He says, I did it. It's my fault. But in Good Form, he says, I didn't actually kill anybody while I was there. But that's part of the problem. Like, part of the problem is I wasn't able to take ownership while I was there. And so now, multiple years in the future, I'm inventing this person that I imagine I killed. So what do you think about us, veterans, taking ownership of an act that we may feel like we committed? Like O'Brien, when you read this, like it feels like O'Brien feels like he committed these acts, right? So he didn't actually do this deed that he claims he did, that he claims he feels responsibility for. I'm not even sure what question I'm really asking here, to be honest. But like,
is there his way to process and to grieve just the actions as a whole?
Or is it guilt by association?
I think
Being a
it's,
part of like a whole unit, even though you didn't do that you still take responsibility because you were there, because you were in the moment of what everybody else was doing.
I think that's definitely part of, like, both things are part of it. Part of it is, well, he states it. I was present and that was enough. Like, I was there when this death occurred, and whether I pulled a trigger or threw a grenade or clacked a claymore, it doesn't matter what I did, my mere presence was enough to cause death and destruction. And I think that this one soldier, I suspect, this is just conjecture, but I suspect that this one soldier for O'Brien is his way of taking responsibility for the actions of others, right, or rightly done or not. Like it may, I'm not even arguing, it's an entirely different discussion whether it's appropriate for you to take responsibility for the actions of others or not. But I know from personal experience, whether we are rightly responsible for other people's actions or not, we can still feel the guilt regardless of whether it's appropriate for us to feel guilt or not. I mean, survivor's guilt is a thing. I mean, how many buddies have we lost or have, body parts amputated that we feel guilty that it didn't happen to us? Why should we feel guilty that we haven't been killed or dismembered? It's not our fault. It's a good thing. It is a shame and a tragedy that our friends had to die, but in some ways, it's a double tragedy that we then blame ourselves when we have no control over that.
Well, I think that's in a way empathy too, though. Like, and I think being also taking it from like a societal point of view, that we put ourselves like in people's shoes. So, you have to like look in a way where he was physically there, but, just being around that atmosphere, I feel like that's the kind of guilt you're just going to push forward no matter what, because you're there, you're in the moment, you're feeling everything, and you're so empathetic for everything that's happening that even if you saw somebody die and it wasn't by your hand, it's still the matter of fact that like why you are there. And being there may have a cause and consequence association. That's my take on it, though, of course. Like that's how I was able to, kind of understand both sides of how he portrayed Ambush versus Good Form.
Even though we're just looking at these two stories, this one soldier, Stephen, have you read the things that Carrie at all?
I have not.
Okay, so this one story reoccurs throughout the book a number of times, like 4, maybe 5 or 6 different times. O'Brien will mention this soldier with the star-shaped hole, and so that specific image, the dead Vietnamese soldier with a star-shaped hole blown in his eye is constantly brought up. So you can tell from the things they carry, this book, that there are things that bother O'Brien, that there are things from his military service in Vietnam specifically during the time period he was there in combat. There are things that bother him to this day. The things they carried is a series of 22 short stories, and they were written as short stories, and they were 13 of the 22 were originally published in magazines and other publications. So one of the things that I find fascinating about this book is it wasn't designed when it was originally written or when the writing first started on it to be a cohesive book, right? It was just a series of short stories that O'Brien was able to either put together, do some slight modifications to, and it becomes a unified and cohesive story. And so when I mentioned that this book is more than the sum of its parts, I really do mean that. The short stories on their own are excellent, and you can get a sense of how they make you feel. Like, you can't not feel when you read these things, especially when you have some of the shared experiences. But when you go from having an individual single story to an entire collection of them, it brings a different sense of power. And when you realize that a lot of these stories were written individually and then collected to create a story, like, you really get a sense that these are things that stuck with O'Brien. Good things, bad things, neutral things. But these are the things, even written in a fictional story, this is what sticks with O'Brien. I really encourage you to read this on your own. This is one of my favorite books, and this is one of the books that we're going to get into it here in just a little bit after our next writing sprint. This is one of the books that taught me how to write creatively, and even, like, in some ways, how to think and accept who I am after the military service. So we're going to get into that a little bit with the next reading, which is something I did on my own. But before then, we have another 10-minute writing sprint. So Natalie, would you let us know what we're going to be doing next?
All right, for the next 10 minutes, our prompts are: is it a lie to write about your feelings about a story rather than relating it directly? Or your second option is writing about eating or drinking something you weren't supposed to. So let's get those 10 minutes up and let's begin.
About 5 minutes left, halfway there. Got 10 seconds left. Go ahead and wrap things up. Alrighty. So, this series is books that have inspired us to write. So I talked a little bit about the things they carried in a couple of stories that are important to me. And now I'm going to read a story that I wrote myself called Girls in the Alley, which I received, I want to say inspiration, but some of the techniques that I learned from O'Brien has made its way into Girls in the Alley.
Want me to share my screen? I got it pulled up. People.
Sure, go ahead and share it. And Delin will be sharing this and I'll be reading it right off the screen. So I'll go ahead and let her get that set up and then I'll do my reading.
Okay. Of course I say that and now
Maybe.
maybe. No, it's good.
We got it.
We're getting there.
I'm trying to tab
Try
it.
the,
I put the link in the chat.
I was gonna say try the.
All right, well, I'm just going to do the reading. There is,
I figured it out. Got it.
all right, here we go. Girls in the Alley. We hit the town fast and hard, just as we have done before, just as we will do again. Fly in on a CH-47 Chinook, secure and search the town and get out. As soon as we dismount the helicopter and it takes off, we run towards the outlying buildings 200 meters away. This town is like everywhere else I've been in Iraq. It could be Bakuba, Tikrit, or Tarmiya. Everything is tan and brown, blindingly bright and hot. Stick your face in an oven, hot. It's built from mud brick, scraps of metal, and anything else the inhabitants can find. The layout is as haphazard as the building materials. Houses join at odd angles to form small alleys that dead end right before the central road. Just another random town. My squad splits off from the rest of the platoon to clear out our designated sector. Our company, First Sergeant, who arrived on a different Chinook, decides to tag along with us. By midday, we have moved through and secured about half the town. It's exhausting running from house to house through this heat, but as hot as it is outside, inside it's even worse. The brick and metal soak up the sun, and the walls keep any kind of breeze from reaching us. First Sergeant halts our movement near an intersection so we can rest briefly and drink some water. He tells me, keep your eyes down these two streets. If anyone pokes their head out of a door or alley, fire a warning shot to push them back in. I post up at the corner of a building, so I have some cover on my left. This lets me see perfectly down the alley in front of me and still have a good view to my side. Watching the path, I take a long drink of warm water from my Camelback. Heat and constant movement are thirst-inducing. After a short time, my eyes are pulled to a slight flash of color in a doorway down the alley. Two girls, probably sisters, hold each other and poke their heads out of a doorway. The building they are in is probably a storage room of some kind. It's tiny. The older one, who can't be more than 14, wears a blue hijab. Even from 30 meters away, I can see the sheer terror and panic in their eyes. I can see on their faces that they want to get back to their house, their family. I pulled out my left hand to wave the girls back, keeping my right on the pistol grip of my machine gun. In my mind, I tell them, stay inside. I begin to wave harder, mentally trying to push them into the room. Stay in there where it's safe. Instead of retreating into the room, they edge further into the doorway, ready to run out. Oh God, please, stay inside so I won't have to shoot you. I raise the machine gun to my shoulder to fire a warning burst. Everything happens in slow motion, yet all at once. The feel of every round leaving the gun, 5 bullets in quick succession, A staccato push on my shoulder where the stock joins my body. A slight rise from the gun sight's red dot from where a moment ago I aimed at the brown mud wall just to the right of the girls. A flash of blue in front of that red dot. And then brown again. My stomach drops into the dirt. The sound comes finally, the explosive crack of the bullets, the metallic chink of the loaded rounds being pulled through and ejected from the gun. A soft thud. The younger girl is crying, screaming before I can even stand up. She was holding her sister's hand when they started running and was pulled down when her sister fell. I bolt down the alley towards them, shocked by what I had caused. When I reach them, blood is pooling around the girl in blue. Her sister is kneeling, frantically shaking her loved one. Blood is soaking into her dress. Screaming at her, screaming at me. She cries, reaching a bloody hand towards me, demanding for me to help her, to know why I shot her sister. Unintelligible words I can never translate, but understand all the same. Gasping, I wake up soaked in sweat. It takes a few seconds to realize I'm in my bedroom, years and thousands of miles away. It was only a nightmare. I had fired the warning shot, but the girls hadn't run until after I fired. As scared as they looked, they may have run because I fired. I often replay how it could have turned out if those girls would have started running a half second sooner. I return to that moment in my head, often as it truly happened, sometimes how it could have happened. Even though they did not get shot, in my mind, I have killed the girls in the alley 100 times. So this is an actual event I've been through. I was actually in Iraq and I actually got posted up there. I fired a warning shot, scared the shit out of a couple young girls, scared the shit out of myself. And now I have to live with this. But what I learned from O'Brien is that there's happening truth and there's story truth. And just because the story truth isn't the happening truth doesn't make the story truth feel any less real to me personally. I know what actually happened. I know that those girls didn't die by my hand. Hopefully they're still alive. I truly hope that they're still alive and well to this day. But even though I know that I didn't harm them, it was a close thing. It was a matter of inches. And I have to live with that. And they did almost die. And I did almost cause that. I was present, and that was enough. O'Brien showed me that, well, what actually happened is important. It's not everything. It's absolutely not everything. And this thing that only happens in my dreams, in my nightmares, whether they're asleep or they're awake, just because it didn't historically, truly happen in real life, doesn't mean I'm not affected by that. Doesn't mean I don't feel that every day of my life. What do you guys think? Not just about the story directly, but what do you guys think about telling a story that didn't actually happen because it feels like it happened? It didn't historically happen, but that doesn't mean that I don't still get nightmares from this. One of our prompts was directly because of this. Is it a lie to write about your feelings about a story rather than relating it directly? For me, that's an easy answer. I mean, no, it's not a lie, because it depends on what you're talking about, right? Like sometimes in order to talk about one specific thing, you have to ignore everything else. But if you're ignoring everything else, isn't that technically a lie? Not really. You're not trying to be deceptive, right? I'm not necessarily trying to make people think that is exactly what I've been through in my life. But it feels like it.
So I wrote that I don't think that's a lie, because I think that there is an actual, like, maybe this isn't the right way to word it, but there's an actual truth and then there's an emotional truth. Because although you didn't necessarily go through that exact moment where, yeah, like a little girl died by your hand, but yeah, you have that moment where you're like, what if? What if? And you keep feeling guilty over it because you keep playing it in your mind and you're like, what if I had? What would have happened? And I think I'm definitely do this to myself where like you have like these close moments where, you know, one thing did go a certain way, but you're like, God, what if that happened? What if? And I think that's just a way of processing. I think it's a way of telling yourself, yeah, this didn't actually happen, but I'm still in a situation where flip of a coin, this could have changed my entire world. You know, had you killed her, like I think that the grief and anxiety would have been tenfold to what you go through even now, just being in a situation where you didn't. And yeah, and you all you can do is hope and pray that they're still alive somewhere.
Yeah.
Because you're still a part of that. And I think that's why I don't consider it a lie, because that's your emotional truth to the situation.
I imagine time slowed down in that moment when you pass through. So just processing this, I think it's beautiful that you write about it. And it's horrible, the somatic, the way you feel of not knowing, of just the unknown of their reaction, how that may have made them feel or caused them to react from that experience moving forward. Just seeing other servicemen and women on the streets, and maybe that impacted them even more, you don't know, right? So just not knowing, but for you to process that in your writing, that's beautiful. And just as they do, the Vietnam veterans do in the story as well, I think it's a great thing that we do that and self-author our experiences so we can navigate those difficult times that could be compressed and packed deep down somewhere in our soul or mind. You don't know that's there. That's really could be just rising up at any unknown time, really, that could really have an impact on you. So I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to write about it.
Thank you. As I think about this event myself, I think one of the things that has bothered me about it that I haven't really picked up until like literally right now is that I almost killed 2 little girls by trying to keep them safe. Like I wasn't shooting at them, I was shooting near them, certainly. And accidents do happen. People have been killed by warning shots. But I didn't want to hurt them. I was trying not to hurt them. I was doing something that, even though I know is dangerous and knew at the time was dangerous, I had confidence in my skills and my ability and my equipment. And so I was performing an action that I intended to keep them safe that almost caused the exact opposite. And in some ways that makes me think, what other dangerous things are we comfortable with doing in the name of safety that could lead to things like this? Because I don't know, it's something about driving these like 2,000-pound plus death machines at 70 miles an hour on a highway and just like listening to your podcast and drinking your latte. Something about that just doesn't strike me as entirely as safe as we think it is, right?
They say you get more car crashes than plane crashes. That's for
And
sure.
and you get in more car crashes in something like within 2 miles of your house because of complacency. I mean, we have this saying, complacency kills, and you can statistically prove that.
That's true.
So let us move on to our next writing sprint, our last writing sprint,
All right. So for this last writing sprint, we're going to do 10 minutes on the clock. And our two prompts are, what are some of your or someone else's famous last words? And how have the things you've carried changed you? So let's get those 10 minutes up. Let's get started.
5 minutes. You're halfway there.
And so,
Got about 10 seconds left on the clocks. Go ahead and finish up with where you're at. Add any punctuation you may want to add. Finish up your sentence. Give yourself just enough to know where you want to go with it, and let's go ahead and wrap things up. So, as part of the veterans writing community, as part of all of our writing events, we have 4 tenets that we like to adhere to, that we truly believe that if you pay attention to these 4 tenets, whatever you're writing, doesn't matter what it is, whatever you're writing will be a stronger piece of writing. So I'm going to go through the things they carried and try to relate how I think our 4 tenets apply to Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. And I'm also going to get Natalie and Stephen involved because I do monologue a little bit too much. So to begin with, who do you think this book was written to? I'm going to start with Natalie. Who do you think that Tim O'Brien is writing to, just from what you've read?
I think to military veterans, but also military in general.
Okay.
I think it's giving a foundation for anybody who's been in combat situations.
Okay.
As well as anybody who's just served. I think you can relate, whether you've been in a combat zone or not, to his stories.
Okay. Stephen, what do you think? Do you have anything to add? Do you think it's pretty much just the military?
I think it's twofold, like you were saying. First and foremost, it's for the writer to process, get it out there. And then hopefully, just depending on the mindset of when you're doing that, is like maybe someone else can relate in your unit or someone you served with, and then down the line with other combat veterans and who may have experienced hard times, and even other people may relate to this story and will help them. So, just to add on to what you said.
So, did some homework ahead of time because that always helps me. I see this as having 3 audiences. And actually, now that you mentioned it, I do think it has a 4th. Like you mentioned, I do think that O'Brien wrote this for himself. I mean, when I wrote Girls in the Alley, it was for no one but me. In a way, it was a response to other people, but I wrote it because it was on my chest and I needed to get it off my chest. So I think you're right. Like, the things they carried, these stories were written for O'Brien. I also have Vietnam veterans because I do think he wrote this specifically to other people of his generation. But because this was first written as a series of short stories and then later it was collected, I don't think it was just Vietnam veterans. Like, I think that O'Brien realized that this might be a bit more universal. But even if O'Brien didn't intend for it, I do think that one of the major audiences of this book are other veterans who did not serve directly in Vietnam. So I don't know if he had other veterans outside of Vietnam in mind. I know it applies because it applies to me. And then the third here, the 4th, would be people interested in war stories about Vietnam. I mean, you don't typically read things you're not really interested in, especially when you get into some of the pretty gory details that are in this book. I mean, just a little bit that we read in the story, like, really only touches upon how violent its potential, how violent this book does get, how much it makes you feel. This definitely is not for everybody. You kind of have to want to engage with the subject matter in order to do it. Otherwise, it's going to feel so uncomfortable that you're probably not going to want to. So we're going to move on to the second tenet. And the second tenet is, will your audience understand everything you say? So again, just based off of what you guys have read so far, Natalie, do you think that the intended audiences, these 4 groups that we just mentioned, will understand everything that O'Brien talks about in The Things They Carried?
I think yes and no, just because based off of the specific stories you read, maybe not, because that sounded like a personal experience. So of course that if you're not in that moment, you might not understand everything. But I also say on the flip side, yes, because again, if you've been in combat or if you served or if you're just aware of these things, because even just hearing the stories, I could envision it. Even though I wasn't physically there, I could still envision what he was going through. And that's why I'd say it's a bit of both. like, sure, there's probably gonna maybe some terminology, things that might not be like as attuned to like a non-military person. But I think definitely if you're in the military, it would probably be like, yeah, I understand.
What do you think, Stephen?
And this is, I have to backtrack just from my own knowledge. As far as the tenants, will they understand everything you say? What's the point is to make sure your audience is informed? Is that the point of the tenet too, or is this?
So the point of the second tenet is clarity. So my specific degree is in English with a technical writing focus. And so as a technical writer, what I need to do is make sure that when a reader comes to the document, they're able to understand whatever's on that document. And ideally, they're able to understand that pretty much just by looking at it.
Okay.
Some of that's going to be formatting, but a lot of that is going to be like what's actually on the page. And so
That gives me a better understanding. The reason I asked that question is I have a psychology background.
okay,
So just like, I don't know, like, not TBI, so just like my processing is not the greatest.
so I actually think at this once, are you familiar with Piaget in the education?
That audibly sounds very
Okay.
familiar.
So Piaget, there's this guy,
Teaching in
psychology, has theories on education and early education. And one of the things that as children develop, one of the things that happens in that development is when a child is below a certain age, the peekaboo effect, right? So if they see it, they believe it exists. And if they don't see it, it doesn't exist. And basically, if you extend that a little further, it's if the toddler knows a thing, then all individuals should know that thing. If the toddler knows where the cookies are, then a total stranger from the other side of the world should know where the cookies are.
I understand now. So you want to make sure it's really specific and there's clarity to everything that's written. And I was from the mindset of just who cares what they think, just throw it down there, get it out.
Okay,
That's where I was coming from, the psych background.
okay,
So thank you for the clarity. That's why I was processing in my mind when I was trying to comprehend the meaning behind it, understand everything you say.
Okay.
But just to piggyback, sorry, that was a detour, but yeah, I believe that yes, that the men and women, the servicemen and women he served with over there will relate to some of those experiences, obviously not to the T, but there might be something that resonates with maybe something or the different experiences that they encounter on their missions and their service.
okay. So I actually said no, that not everything, the audience, the intended audience will not understand everything in this book. But I also said that that's intentional. And I think you can get a glimpse of this by looking at the two stories we covered today. And so in Ambush, O'Brien really takes direct ownership of this fatality that he caused, right? But in Good Form, he says, no, that's an entirely invented character that never existed, and he's just somebody that I have in my mind so that I'm able to process certain things. And so he has these two directly conflicting statements in these stories, right? So that's kind of a clue. And you wouldn't know because you haven't read in the book, but he has a number of things like that, where he says one thing and then further in the book, like he'll have a completely opposite take on it. But like I mentioned, it's not done to confuse the reader. Like in some ways it is, but in a lot of ways it's because it doesn't matter whether that individual story is true or not. It's because through this entire book, O'Brien is exploring two different types of truth: story truth and happening truth. And one of the things that I think O'Brien really is trying to get through with this book is that a lot of times story truth is more important than happening truth, because what actually happened is pretty irrelevant in the aftermath. How I emotionally and even physically have to deal with the things that I've been through now 10-ish years ago, one, we don't process that normally, right? Like recall something that happened 10 years ago. Well, you're not going to recall it in the same order that it happened. And so things in this book aren't clear because life isn't clear. It's not clear going through it, so why should it be clear in a book about war? And so I do think that O'Brien did do some things that kind of confuse the reader, but it's done because he's trying to make a point, right? In Good Form, he says almost everything else is invented, but it's not a game, right? Like he's telling you that a lot of these stories are made up, but he's not doing it just because he wants to be confusing. He's doing it because it's a form. It has a purpose. But that leads us into the third question, which is pretty similar. And that is the story all there, or are there parts left out?
Oh, I think there's definitely parts left out.
So could you touch upon, if you can think of anything, can you touch upon with the stories we've read, some things that you feel are missing from the story?
Well, I'm thinking of when he mentions like the way you read it sounded like that was his daughter saying like you killed somebody. I think he's leaving out the whole point of when she says that. He goes, well, of course I could say, of course I haven't, to really show like, okay, I haven't actually killed somebody because my first, this encounter didn't happen to me. This is something I came up with. But I think it's in those moments where you do it intentionally to further your point, because then you can be like, well, I'm telling you, I told my daughter to her face, I did not kill this person. However, emotionally, I feel like I killed this person. And I think that's just to say, like, because you don't really get a picture of what his daughter's thinking, but it's just that moment, snippet in time to go, this is what my point is, and this is why I'm telling you this story. And I think that helps to pull it back into who your audience is.
So I think you already kind of touched on this, but I'll ask the question anyway. Do you think that the stories, or at least of the two stories you read at O'Brien's, do you think these stories suffer or are less than they could be, that they could be improved by including this missing information? Or do you think that this missing information should be missing? Basically, do you think it would be, do you personally, opinion, think the story would be better with more information, or should this information be missing?
I think it should be missing.
Why?
Because it like I said, it brings the point home. You're not convoluting it with extra information. It's like, this is why I'm saying this. And I think that because he has a certain type of style, and he tends to, and just based off just from these two, he tends to be more in that ambiguous style of like, yes, and then now the reader must think about why I said these things. And so I think it's important that he has this missing information.
What are your thoughts, Stephen?
Just as a writer and the struggle, I can only imagine your process of just getting out there and publishing it, right? So I know me personally, I have perfectionist tendencies, so I'll like overanalyzing. I won't go to sleep. I'll stay up until something's done, and I still won't think it's perfect. That's not really a good thing, but I observed that in school. But to piggyback, well, there's a thought, cool. But just the writing, just the internal struggle he must go through just to get that out there, and everything he's processing, and different ways to process of his experience of serving. And all the things that you spoke and shared in my brief encounter with you, and how you struggle with those things as well. And I'm sure we all struggle with similar, just on different scales, different levels of things in life where we struggle and how we process those things. I apologize, what was your question?
The prompt we're on, or the tenet we're on, is the story all there, or are there parts left out? And so part of the question I'm asking is directly that, is the story all there, or are there things he left out? And I think we all know that their answer is he definitely has left things out. So the follow-on question, the question I'm really asking here is, does it matter? Does it matter that he left things out? Does it matter for the good? Does it matter for the bad? Would it be better if he added in information that he has left out?
Do you think it's the author's choice? Because maybe it'd be healthy if you process more things over there. If he's got stuff still bubbling up inside, so that's up to him maybe, or his
And-
relationships maybe.
And that's
I
one
don't
of the
think that's for me to say, really. I don't know.
and that's one of the things we talk about and we bring up is sometimes in order to get writing done, you have to leave things out. So when I write the things that have been published, I've written 2 things that have been published so far. The story you read, the story that we read earlier, The Girls in the Alley, and there's a poem called Deeper Than Bone. I'm a perfectionist too, right? Like I have to have every line just right, but it doesn't quite work. Like it just doesn't quite work. And a lot of times, especially with Deeper Than Bone, the poem, it's cryptic on purpose because I want to let the reader know that these specific things happened. But that's all I want them to know. I want them to know that a series of deaths have occurred in my life, which is what Deeper Than Bone is about, a series of deaths. But they don't need to know their names. The names aren't important to the reader. They're important to me, but they're not important to the reader. The reader's never met these people before. They're obviously will never meet them again. For me, sometimes you leave things out, like you mentioned, because they're not important, because they'll distract from the story, because the story is actually clearer with things missing rather than being present. But sometimes I leave things out because, like you mentioned, Stephen, I'm not ready to emotionally deal with them. I have to let them go. I can never process them because they're so painful to deal with that it's more harmful than beneficial. I would be shocked if O'Brien didn't have some experiences like that, especially after reading just the 2 stories we've read. O'Brien has been through some shit. O'Brien has been through some very hard things in his life, especially during this time period. And this is how he's processed, at least to some degree. I mean, I think anybody who's read any of this book can see that this was emotionally, psychologically healing for O'Brien just to write it. And that brings up our last tenet. Who are you writing? Why are you writing specifically about this? So why do you think O'Brien? He's written other books. So I'm gonna read some of the titles of these other books that he's published. If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home, Northern Lights. One of his first books, and actually one of his best-selling books until the things they carried, was Going After Cacciato. Here's another one I have, In the Lake in the Woods. So he's written a number of books, and all of these other books, they're all fiction books as well. Going After Cacciato has some background in Vietnam, but it's a totally fictional story. And so this is the only book of O'Brien's that I've encountered that seems to have really personal experiences, whether they've been obfuscated by making them fictional or not. Like this feels like it happened to a real deal person rather than just some person in a book that could potentially be real. So why do you think O'Brien wrote specifically about these things?
I want to say processing for sure, but at the same time, I think it's hard, at least when I think about why an author will write something, it's hard to pinpoint exactly why, because they're going to have their own, reasons and everything around it. So it's like looking at a piece of art. You can speculate what the artist means all day, but at the end of the day, their meaning could be vastly different than what yours is. So based off of what he has written, it sounds like for military purposes, for, working things out. But unless I actually talk to him, I don't think I could ever know.
So based off a couple of readings, what do you think?
I just speculate. I don't like to do that. But he could, obviously it's heavy on his mind. Maybe nightmares, maybe flashbacks, maybe just loved ones he served with, the men and women and whatnot. I think it's just impacted him, and maybe it's just a therapeutic exercise. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe not. But in my mind, I think hopefully it has been. I don't know. Maybe we know. Maybe there's some interviews out there. I'm really intrigued to learn more about him and his work and reading that book.
So we all have pretty much the same answer. I'm going to just read what I have. O'Brien has stories to tell. It's clear in the stories he does tell that he has things he needs to talk about. It is fiction, and some of the stories contradict themselves. It's obvious that he carried these things around for many years. These are particular stories that have importance to him and those that he knew. These are the stories that stuck with him and his friends. So some of the stories in this book, O'Brien is the narrator of the book. The person who's actually like telling the stories in this book is completely unnamed. And so when I read it, I choose to think that it's O'Brien, the character, acting as the narrator. But O'Brien himself appears in the stories as a character as well. And so it's kind of ambiguous, like who's actually telling the story in some ways. But not all of the stories, some of the stories deal more with O'Brien's friends than it does O'Brien himself. And so I think that, kind of like we said, like all of these stories are important to O'Brien in some way or form. But sometimes it's because they're stories that were important to your friends rather than you personally. And it's us carrying the weight for our friends, right? It's us saying, this was important to you and you are important to me, and therefore I will make it important to me for you.
I like that take on that.
So that's kind of what I got out of this. So with that being said, we are running a little short on time, so we are going to wrap things up. I'm going to let Natalie give her closing announcements, and we will wrap up.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us. So you don't have to share what you wrote today, but do share with us if you want to. Join us next time for Delin's book, Opening Up by Writing It Down. We are recording this session, so if you're watching this on YouTube, like and share this video. Tell your friends if you found it interesting, fun, or helpful. And please put thoughts and reactions in the comment section using #replay if you're watching a recording. Make sure to do our follow-up activities. So maybe if you have some time, do a 20-minute sprint as a follow-up, finishing thoughts or developing what you started. And don't forget to email us or visit our website for follow-up or to arrange one-on-one work towards publication.
We are having we're having a writing critique in November, at the end of November. So if you do want to publish with us, get to us before the end of November so you can get into that critique.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and see you next week.
See ya. Thank you.